Hello, and welcome to our conference on the state of the art of artificial intelligence and the practice of law at the Silicon Flatiron Center at the University of Colorado Law School. I'm Harry Surden, and I'm professor of law at the University of Colorado and director of the Silicon Flatiron Center Artificial Intelligence Initiative. We're so pleased to have you here. Let me begin by thanking the many people who worked so hard to make this event happen, including Amy Stepanovich, Eileen Brown, Nate Mariotti, Sarah Shitgren, and the rest of the amazing Silicon Flatiron staff and student volunteers, and also the terrific staff of the law school and leadership, and my excellent faculty directors. It's also a Silicon Flatiron's custom to begin by acknowledging the first peoples upon whose traditional land the University of Colorado now sits. So today we are going to be talking about artificial intelligence in the practice of law. And we have a terrific panel lineup of experts in this field. And it's important to acknowledge that our goal is to provide a discussion about the state of the art of artificial intelligence in law, but have it firmly rooted in evidence. And as many of you may have encountered in the world, much of the discussion about artificial intelligence outside of law and the world generally often comes with some hyperbole, exaggeration, and outright speculation. So sometimes this exaggeration or hyperbole occurs because somebody is trying to sell you an artificial intelligence enabled product, or sometimes it's just simple misunderstandings about the underlying technology and its capabilities, or sometimes it's just about trying to attract media attention or clicks or marketing. So that is not our goal here. Our goal is to have a discussion firmly rooted in the evidence, acknowledging both the amazing capabilities of artificial intelligence, but equally much its limits, recognizing its promise when it is due, but also being careful not to overpromise and to realize what artificial intelligence can do in the current and near time. So with that saying, let me acknowledge that today's artificial technology has been capable of many amazing feats outside of law, from self-driving vehicles to language translation. Many of these have been enabled by a family of artificial intelligence techniques called machine learning that involve spotting patterns in data. But on the other hand, I also want to acknowledge, for those of you who do not study the field closely, the limits of current and near-term artificial AI technology. So despite its name, artificial intelligence, is a bit of a misnomer today. Despite what the media suggests, today's artificial intelligence is not what is often referred to as strong AI. So strong AI would be the AI of the movies or science fiction, where artificial intelligence systems can think at a level that meets or exceeds humans in lots of different ways. Such an AI system would be capable of arbitrary conversations about any topic, or to engage in abstract reasoning about philosophy or what have you. And in my opinion, and I do spend a lot of time studying the state of the art and working with the technologies, there's no evidence that we're anywhere close to that in the near term, at least in the 5-year time frame, or many even several years out. But I think it's hard to project beyond the 5-year time frame. Rather, most modern AI systems, while capable of amazing results in certain areas, lack the ability to engage in abstract reasoning or common sense. So just to give you an amusing example, I, not that long ago, was testing out the state-of-the-art AI system, which is a deep learning system well known to have what's known as 180 billion parameters. So it's said to be very advanced. And I tested it out with a series of common sense questions that a toddler could answer. So when I asked it a kind of silly question, how many legs do a banana have? To which a toddler would laugh and say, bananas don't have legs. The multiple artificial intelligence systems of this variety confidently answered, bananas have 1,000 legs. So, and the reason is a lot of this is pattern based. And when you ask a silly common sense question like that, no one has ever bothered to write down the fact that we all know that bananas do not have legs, where a toddler would know that. So all this is not to say that artificial intelligence hasn't been capable of amazing feats. It's just that we have to be cognizant of its limits. So with that in mind, we are going to see some of the interesting feats that have been capable in AI and law. And we're going to starting our first panel with a terrific set of panelists looking at artificial intelligence in the use of transactional legal practice. In the interest of time, I am not going to have complex biographies of our expert panelists, but let me say, just introduce them briefly and dive directly into our panel. Joining me in no particular order is Dr. Jason Adaska, who is the Director of Innovation Labs at Holland and Hart, LLP. Also joining me, Stephanie Curcio, who is not only an IP attorney, but also the co-founder and CEO of Legalicity, NLPatent, a patent AI startup. And last but not least is Roland Vogl from Stanford University, who's the executive director of the CodeX Center, the Stanford Center for Legal Informatics. So let us dive right in, and let me address the first question to Jason, and then we'll open this up to the panelists more broadly. So Jason, in your view, what are some examples where AI is actually being used successfully in transactional practice?
Great question. Thanks, Harry, and obviously thanks everybody for providing this opportunity to talk to this group. So I think that what's interesting about AI in transactional practices or law in general is that people have been waiting for there to be a big sea change where suddenly AI arrives on the scene. And I think what's actually happening is something that's more of a gradual evolution. There's been a set of tools that people have used. Those tools are getting more capable, they're getting more features, they're able to kind of tackle more complicated problems. But we're not seeing a big phase shift. So some of the things that I think I would point to as being big wins for AI in transactional practice are actually things that people probably don't always point to as being, the state of the art, most advanced AI. I'll start with what I think are probably the highlights. Doc review is probably top of the list. So for those that don't kind of know this set of AI tools, if you're in a transactional practice, or real estate, you're doing mergers and acquisitions, a lot of times you're dealing with contracts or sets of contracts. There are a set of AI-driven tools that can look at a contract and essentially identify portions of it that are relevant for different clauses. In some cases, being able to extract information automatically out of it. And they can do this even though there's a lot of variation in what the language is for those clauses, exactly where the data, where that data lies. That is built on sort of a set of natural language processing tools that have been around for a while, but have gotten increasingly more sophisticated. So now there's actually a lot of players in this space. And I've seen at our firm, both the folks doing M&A work, so folks doing real estate work, have started to use these tools to be more efficient. One of the caveats, I guess, I'll add to all the AI tools that I've seen in practice, and it kind of speaks to your point, Harry, about where is the state of the art. Most of these are still very much human in the loop. So we're not having doc review tools that are basically analyzing a contract and spitting out the results directly to a client. Those are still attorneys or in some cases paralegals using this essentially to gather information more efficiently, to look over a larger space of set of documents that would just be very time intensive. So it's an efficiency tool. Another area that I think is relevant that I've seen people use is in the area of kind of legal research. Now we're talking transactional practice, and most of the kind of tools that people think about in this space are kind of your kind of case law search, where you can find relevant things, not just by keywords, but by more kind of semantic queries. I do a lot of work in the intellectual property practice, and there are similar sets of tools for that area. If you're doing kind of patent work and you want to understand whether a patent that you're working on for a client is novel or not, there are tools that allow you to search across the space of patents efficiently with finding just similar kinds of documents based on what the invention is that your client has. Similar things on the trademark space. If you want a distinctive mark, being able to search the set of images efficiently, being able to look at not just, does this look the same, but does it have some of the same elements? Does it have an apple? Does it have a bird? Some combinations of those things. The ability to look at text and have that translated to images is not something that's just being used by some attorneys, but there's actually organizations, right? WIPO, for instance, has a set of tools that they are using for those that are analyzing trademarks, right, to see whether they're distinctive, that are being used. So I'd say there's a big space of what I would call legal research that is definitely being used and very successful. A third area that I find interesting in how banal it is, but also how impactful it can be. I have yet to meet an attorney that does not dislike having to keep track of billable hours and billing narratives. There's a whole set of tools, again, that are in this natural language processing space that can look at billing narratives and either help classify them or in some cases help an attorney generate them more efficiently. I've seen both ends of those. I think there's more adoption on the in-house side, for larger companies that are trying to kind of get a sense of what their outside counsel are doing, where they're spending some time. There's a whole set of tools that I think are starting to affect transactional attorneys from the client side, right? That are looking at their billing narratives and they're using AI to kind of classify those. As I said, I think those would be kind of highlight areas. There's a lot of small ones. Obviously, individuals experience AI in large and small ways just in their day-to-day. You're doing text messages, you're writing an email, and you have some suggestions for completions. But it's an exciting field, but I think it's still very much a human in the loop for the tools that are actually being used.
Great, thank you, Jason. So when I'm hearing a lot of our AI being used as sort of decision support systems for humans to make better decisions in large amounts of information.
100%.
Thanks. So let me throw out the same question to either Stephanie or Roland. Just raise your hand and I'll call on you. What are some examples where you're seeing AI being used successfully in transactional practice out there in the world?
I can jump in and add some comments. So I agree with everything, of course, that Jason just mentioned. And on top of what he mentioned, we are also seeing tools being developed for prediction. So predicting various different things like outcomes or how something will be treated. For example, in employment law, I know of tools that will predict whether a certain individual will be treated more like an employee or an independent contractor and give it a certain set of facts. And on the IP side, we do some research in prediction as well. Patent data is very nice to work with because there's so much of it and it's so well labeled. And being able to analyze to predict whether certain outcomes are more likely is really useful to in prosecution, patent prosecution, when you're submitting a patent application to the patent office. So is it likely that your idea is patentable given various different criteria is now something that can be somewhat predicted on a pretty granular level, which is really exciting and interesting area of research that we're up to.
Great. Thanks, Stephanie. So yeah, patent and IP seems like a real early adopter area of AI. Roland.
Right. Well, thank you. I think Jason and Stephanie gave a lot of great examples. I would probably add the good old-fashioned AI examples for how law firms are packaging some of their knowledge into expert systems that their clients can use and navigate through a certain area of law, or even you go through a legal chatbot kind of experience. It's somewhat distinct from the data-driven approach, machine learning, NLP approaches of the examples that Jason and Stephanie gave. And then I would also say we see AI used in interesting ways for matchmaking between lawyers and clients. So using algorithms to match the right client with the right lawyer is happening in a consumer-facing legal practice, but also high stakes. There are platforms that are matching Fortune 500 companies with top 100 law firms, and so those are some of the other areas that maybe are not so much talked about. And then in IP practice, yes, I think it's an area of a lot of AI for smart drafting, contextual searching, guided reading, those kinds of things.
Great, Roland. And I'm really glad that you mentioned good old-fashioned AI or symbolic and rules-based AI, because it's actually quite a rich and developed area of artificial intelligence that often gets overshadowed. I think primarily because it's been so successful in its limited domains, and it kind of just blends into the system so successfully that you kind of just ignore it in the background. Jason, did you want to add on to that?
Yeah. I think that's a great point. I mean, we've seen. I think this kind of goes under the heading of some technology that's evolved kind of quietly behind the scenes, and is not what people tend to think of, in the media with AI now. But I found law is one of the unique areas where that type of AI is really relevant, right? We've had projects internally that are developing expert systems for different practice areas that are going through some of the same processes over and over. And again, it's around efficiency. But a benefit of that type of AI that actually I think can make it more easy for a lot of practitioners to adopt is the inferences that come out of it are often very explainable, right? It's here are a set of rules or regulations, and you get a suggestion, and it's not just, hey, it came from a black box, but actually gives, some description of why that inference, turned out the way that it was, which, for a lot of attorneys is really important, right? Having something that they kind of understand is grounded in truth, I think is hugely important. So.
Yeah, I think that's just to react to that, I think it's a great point. One that we've been giving a lot of attention to. We are researching this area of computable contracts, which is not so much a deployed technology just yet, but it's coming. And also in that context, it's really where the rules approach can give explanations. So we're looking at that in the context of insurance, and people navigating through their insurance policy and asking questions that doing queries that we can sort of directly answer from the computable contract, and give an explanation for why a claim was refused or accepted. So that is what data-driven machine learning, NLP, AI is really struggling with, and that's sort of like a kind of where the good old-fashioned rules-based approach can really
I think
bridge the gap.
From a pure technology perspective, right? I mean, if you have a law or a regulation, you don't have a whole lot of those, right? You have whatever the law is. You have sort of one data point for that. So in some sense, it just doesn't. Something that requires huge amounts of data is just not gonna be well adapted to that, or at least not as efficiently.
Great points. So let's shift gears a little bit, and I'll turn to Stephanie. So in your experience and what you've seen out there, what are some of the limitations with artificial intelligence in the use of transactional work, and how do you see that manifesting itself?
Limitations with AI. This is the funny question because I think that a lot of the limitations are actually not necessarily with the technology, but with the user's interpretation of the technology. When we started our company over 3 years ago, it was sort of an interesting time because people didn't really understand the value of artificial intelligence in practice. And I think that there's a lot more understanding of how to leverage these tools now. But just to drive this point home, there's a lot of folks that assumed you'd be leveraging technology and inputting some information and then something magic would happen and the best answer would be popped out before you, but you can just quickly deliver it to your client and there you go. You can do away with the whole task. And of course, that's not where the technology is. So I think the limitations really lie in attorneys' understanding of how best to use tools and what you can practically expect from tools. And so I spend a lot of my time trying to elucidate what's happening behind the scenes and how you can make the most out of a tool in your practice, because understanding how something works really helps to put into perspective how best to leverage that tool. So to answer your question in sort of a funny way, I think that the limitations actually lie with attorneys and not necessarily with the tools, because the tools continue to improve and get better, but they're not a human. It's not going to replace an attorney. And in fact, it shouldn't replace an attorney because there's some ethical obligations that you need to abide by in order not to be on the wrong side of some of those issues. So yes, that's my answer to that question, but I'm looking forward to having Jason and Roland's interpretation as well.
Yeah, that's a great point. I've recently wrote a paper on predictive legal analytics, and one of my conclusions is that sometimes tools are actually worse than no tools at all if the data is being misinterpreted and misapplied by people
Absolutely
who don't know how to properly handle it. And as we all know, that most lawyers are not data scientists or trained in statistics for the most part. So
totally. I think that, to add to that point, Harry, and I'm glad that you made that point. I'm aware of certain tools that frankly just don't help your practice and make it actually more difficult. So for example, I've been speaking to folks that are in sort of the translations business, using AI for translation services. And I would assume that machine translations would greatly reduce the time required for translations. And in fact, that's not really the case, because when a machine translation is presented to a regular human translator, they would see a sentence, it might be a little bit awkward, but it's not wrong. So they don't change it. But if they were to be the first person to take a pass at that sentence, they would draft it differently. And so the quality actually decreases slightly because you just leave these kind of awkward sentences that are grammatically a little bit awkward, but technically correct. So yes, I'm happy that you made that point. I totally agree with you.
Okay, Jason, looks like you have a reaction here.
Yeah, and I guess this is kind of going back to the adoption. Working in a law firm, I can. Stephanie's comment of people wanting something that just kind of works, does everything soup to nuts, resonates. I mean, what's interesting is I think I found that a lot of practitioners live in kind of a bimodal camp. There's either some that are great skeptics that say, you know what, there's no way that technology can do any of the things, right? That you're saying it can do, or are sort of the true believers and sort of are expecting the tool to be able to do everything, right? So that they're very hands-off and kind of delegate it. And the reality is that where the technology is, I think right now is in between, and both of those are a little bit wrong-headed, right? There is absolutely some technology that can be that can improve the process. Stephanie's point notwithstanding, right, that there are certainly use cases where a partial solution is actually worse than no solution. But it's also true that there are very limited instances where it can be completely hands-off, no human in the loop, at least for any kind of substantive work. I think one of the challenges right now with 2021, where is the technology, how could people take advantage of it, is that middle ground is kind of where the sweet spot is.
Yeah, that's a great point, Jason. And we see there is an illusion out there about how automated a lot of AI systems are. And we even see this in the era of self-driving cars. A lot of people don't realize that even Google's, Waymo's most advanced self-driving cars, they have a call center where there are humans monitoring the driving and help the car get out of trouble. So there's still humans in the loop, even when it appears to be totally automated. Roland, did you have a reaction to some of the limitations
Well,
question?
yeah. So I think this is an interesting debate. I think, a few years ago, was this concept of the robo-lawyer, was sort of like a lot of people's imagination, worked up a lot of people's imagination. And that concept is sort of, like you explained at the beginning, this kind of super intelligence, right? That a robot that's context aware and has common sense. And I think we are far from that. I think there's lots of narrow, specific, niche applications of AI. We've been thinking at the center about actually doing a competition to create a machine that can pass the bar exam. It's sort of like, let's set the bar here and see if it's possible, to sort of basically check what the current capabilities are. And I think that would really be an interesting, conversation starter also about the regulation of the legal profession. So what would it mean if we had a machine that can pass the bar? And I asked a bunch of folks in the space, what do you think? Is that possible? Give them the contract portion of the bar exam, and can we create a machine that can pass let's say the contract portion of the bar exam? And the spectrum of opinions is extremely wide, even among experts, right? There's some folks on the NLP ML side who say, well, give me a team, of a couple of researchers, and within 2 or 3 months, we can pass the contract portion of the bar exam. And then others, folks like Mike Genesaret, who's on the good old-fashioned AI side, he says, well, because the bar exam and the questions that I ask on the bar exam require so much common knowledge that we would need, a complete ontology of the world for the machine to actually pass the bar exam. And I think it's that speaks to sort of the limitations, right? There's a lot of legal areas and context in transactional practice where we need to bring in the human common sense to get good solution. And the machines can't do that and won't be able to do it in a long time until we have a complete ontology of everything in the world. And that's why your example about the banana was very apropos. But anyway, so I agree with everyone. I think there's very impressive and very useful efficiency creating solutions, but there's no such thing as a robo-lawyer.
And Jason, do you looks like you have a reaction to some of
I was going to ask Jason's opinion too.
At least one thing that Roland said on that is and this is sort of me coming from a technologist background, but what I think is exciting about this space right now is that Roland's example of like, can we create an AI system that can pass the bar? That's a testable hypothesis. And it sounds like you have some folks that are kind of interested in doing that. I think one of the things that's exciting is there's a lot of areas that we feel pretty certain that an AI is not going to be able to really help with. There's some that we've seen. All right, you can actually do some AI-driven diligence and have something that's helpful. I think that there's a large gray area, and as technology moves, that gray area kind of gets bigger. One of the, I think, responsibilities for people working in this space, especially that are looking at the cutting edge, is to try to come up with objective ways of answering some of these questions, right? Can we create an AI that passes the bar? I don't know. I mean, I've got opinions. It sounds like Roland said there's a wide swath of people. That's testable. I think that as we move forward and this becomes a lot, AI in transactional practice becomes something that's more common, the need for having objective measures of can an AI system do X is really important, because I think, we can talk about what our intuitions are. They may be totally right, they may be totally wrong, but I think it's important for us to test those things.
Yeah, that's a great point, Jason, having sort of objective measures. And as I said, one of the issues in the space is that there is a lot of exaggeration. So one might guess maybe the charitable interpretation is that the scientists who think that AI will be able to pass the bar with enough manpower are, visionaries. The uncharitable version is they're trying to attract research funding. Right. Great. Stephanie, did you have any reactions to either Roland or Jason's comments?
Well, what Jason mentioned about objective measures to test certain aspects of AI, that's really hard to do in a lot of circumstances, because what is the benchmark? What is the gold standard for a lot of these things? Is it the perfect lawyer or is it some other measure? So, this is a challenge that we have all the time at being a part of the AI space, creating tools. What do we measure it against? So, for example, our AI patent search platform, we first attempted to measure the search platform against a USPTO patent examiner as the gold standard. But is that really the gold standard? The examiner is not infallible. The examiner could miss something, especially when you're searching through a thicket of information and different patent documents might be pulled that are relevant. Are they the most relevant? I'm not sure. So it's a really difficult measure. Turning then to litigation data, is that the best gold standard? Spending, a lot of folks that embark on any sort of litigation, if they're defending a patent or defending some infringement suit, they will seek to invalidate the patent that's being asserted against them. They will spend tens of thousands of dollars trying to scorch the earth to find anything possible that would invalidate the patent that's being asserted against them. Is that really the right measure then, to compare an AI system in a matter of seconds that would produce some results that would take normally months and tens of thousands of dollars to uncover, that was previously overlooked by the examiner? So it's a really difficult standard, and I just sympathize with folks out there that are attempting to benchmark these tools. And the various features are challenging as well. A lot of these tools are iterative. So you get an initial set of results or some outcome from the AI, and then the user, the attorney, might input some further information to refine whatever the output may be. So what do you benchmark it against? Do you benchmark it against the original output, or do you factor in sort of further attorney input? I think all of these factors are really interesting to consider and making benchmarking extremely difficult to do.
Yeah.
That's a great point, Stephanie. There are a lot of nuances to appropriate benchmarking and getting it correctly. Jason, did you want to follow up on that?
No, I think it's a great point. I think it's the devil's in the details with all of this, and I think picking in other places for AI, people are trying to create some data sets that benchmark performance. I know that there's a number of efforts for that in the legal AI space. In fact, I know Stanford, there's a whole lot of NLP and legal reasoning benchmarks. I think more of those kind of things will help people, keep their feet grounded. Stephanie's point, notwithstanding, right, that some of these problems, what people want, what success is hard to quantify. I think that's a great point.
Roland, did you have any reactions?
Yeah, no, I think a few years ago, one of the legal tech companies in the contract analytics space did a machine versus human lawyer contest, where they did sort of like, had their machine run against 20 lawyers, I think, on issue spotting in NDA, and not surprisingly, the machine won. But is that really the measure of good lawyering? I mean, issue spotting is an important aspect of lawyering, but is it all? I mean, is that all that makes a good lawyer? But anyways, I don't think it's, maybe the question is not like, sort of the machine versus the human lawyer. It's like, how can human lawyers best leverage machine to automate and support their decisions on specific aspects. But anyways, that's just one example for a company that tried to do that benchmarking in the contract analytics space.
And
it's very hard. I think Stephanie's point is a good one.
Roland, that's a terrific segue to our next question, which I'll throw out to you. So part of the idea of artificial intelligence in legal practice that it's going to provide you some advantage, make your life easier or better as an attorney. And we've heard from Stephanie and Jason and you as well that some of the advantages might be important, but only incremental. So where are you, as you survey the landscape, seeing AI providing real competitive advantages to transactional attorneys today?
So I think anywhere where we make lawyers more efficient, we allow them to do the same amount of work in a short amount of time, should be competitive advantage, right? And then that's sort of like ignoring the issue of, the billable hour and, all that, that should at some point, make space for a better model. But there are many examples where AI is effectively used today in transactional practice to make lawyers more efficient. And the two examples I like in transactional practice is this whole area of, maybe there are three examples. So the first one is, helping a legal department understand what their playbook is. What is their playbook on negotiating a specific kind of agreement, right? Some organizations know that and have it explicit. In many organizations, that knowledge resides in the brains of attorneys who've been there for many years, and it's sort of passed on person to person. There are companies who help legal departments kind of make that explicit and turn it into a computable form. And then you get, once you have that, every time you get an incoming contract, you can automatically do a red line of that incoming agreement, right? And that could be hundreds of pages of agreement, and the machine automatically marks it up according to the playbook of the company. So that saves like many hours of lawyer time and makes the department more efficient and should give it more competitive advantage. And another example, I think, is in contract drafting, in tech-assisted contract drafting. There are companies out there that help lawyers who draft a contract basically see on all the different terms they're using that are the operational terms, see what's sort of the spectrum, right? Like what's the most friendly verbiage that's most friendly to their client versus the other party. What do most other lawyers in that comparable situation use for this particular term? Those are very helpful. This is sort of like the practical law company on steroids, right? So they're bringing in all this data into the contract drafting process. That's very powerful, right? Like you're not sort of limited to just one template that you found somewhere, but it's a living document that has relevant data for your specific context. And so that's also, I think, a very lawyer enhancing technology. And it's possible maybe in 20 years, these kinds of technologies become lawyer replacing, but at the moment they're solidly in the lawyer enhancing field. And there's similar things, I think, in patent prosecution, and even sort of automated patent drafting technologies, and sort of I think many other practice areas too. But I think I like those examples because it's there is sort of a set of instructions and processes and knowledge that live in an organization, and the AI sort of this process helps us capture that and apply it to sort of the day-to-day kind of work of lawyering, and taking the tedium out of lawyering, right? Allowing sort of the human lawyer to sort of take a sort of a more kind of strategic role in bringing more legal judgment, and not having to do sort of the tedious kind of write-up and every agreement say, okay, oh yeah, we never agreed to an arbitration clause, and so here we go again. Those things can be left to the machine at this point in time.
Great. So Roland, you're seeing a lot of these really important knowledge gathering and comparative services is really providing a comparative advantage today.
Yeah.
Fabulous. Any reactions from either Stephanie or Jason about where you're seeing competitive advantage in AI today? Stephanie, you look like you've got something.
Just skip me for a second. My AirPods just died. If you can hear me.
We can hear you.
Yeah, we can.
I'll turn over to Jason, and then I'll return to you, Stephanie.
Yeah. So I'll react. I actually I thought those were pretty interesting examples that Roland gave, and I kind of want to react to one of them, because I think it speaks to me. One of the benefits of AI technologies has been, in some ways, not that it gives new features, but it makes things that people either want to do or are trying to do easier. Here's an example. So, Roland, you were talking about, shared language, right? Or shared kind of playbooks across a firm or across a client team, and how now you can kind of synthesize that more easily. So I've, within the firm, have had numerous discussions over the last several years that often go like, we as a group would like to get everything sort of all on one page, so that we're using the same sorts of language for all of our different clients, because we believe that it would make us more efficient, give a better work product, et cetera. And in the past, a lot of the approaches for that were not AI kind of approaches, but we're going to do a certain process. We're going to tag every document we have with a particular thing, or we're going to, ensure that after an associate gives a draft, that they put this file in this folder and tag it associate, in the right way so that we can find it later. And it's all of these very kind of work-intensive processes to kind of categorize and label the data so that people can use it later. And I'll say in my experience, 100% of those things do not work long term, right? Maybe they work for a certain short period of time, but then it's a lot of work, right? And people are busy, and there's not really a short term. There's only a long term benefit to it. I think some of the tools now, the AI tools that let you gather information a lot more flexibly. You don't just have to look for a tag that you decided 3 years ago is a tag you're going to use for this. You can have it give me the language that's semantically similar. Find that across all of our systems. That almost just like ease of use. It's not a new feature. It's just, it allows you to do certain things that used to be a very person-intensive process. And now the technology makes is flexible enough that you can pull those things off a lot more easily. So I agree that there's a competitive advantage in that. It's not specifically AI. I guess you could do it through other processes, but it's more practical, right, with AI systems.
Terrific. Stephanie.
Back now, so I can answer the question too. I just wanted to throw in sort of an interesting, thought experiment. So a lot of people ask us about more high-level tasks. Can the AI system start to do more lawyerly functions as opposed to just augmenting some low-hanging fruit? And that is a really interesting question. And I just wanted to throw out that in our experience, we're not quite quite there yet in terms of like being practically or commercially useful, because of the reasons you discussed through your banana example, and Roland also elaborated on. Lacking sort of human intelligence is a really big factor in being able to perform more more detailed tasks that would be more high functioning tasks, like drafting patent applications, for example. So there's some talk in our space to leverage some of the latest developments in NLP technology to have an AI system take some, description of an invention and draft a set of patent claims. And although it sounds really cool, and it would be awesome if an AI could do that, lacking that just common sense is actually a huge factor in being able to make a useful, practically applicable tool. So I just wanted to add that limitation to some of the more useful augmenting tools that are currently available that Roland and Jason covered.
Great, thank you. And in a minute, we'll turn to questions, and we always start out with a question to a student. So students who are attendees in the audience, I hope you'll be lining up your questions while we're thinking about it. But our last question, just briefly in a couple of sentences, what do you see as the most exciting areas of AI growth in legal transactional work looking forward based upon what we see today? Just raise your hand if you want me to. Okay, Jason, go ahead.
I'll go. I'm personally impressed by the advances in NLP, specifically these large scale language models. They're not ready for what people want them to do, especially on the generative side, but they've actually been moving pretty quickly, and I'm excited to see where that technology goes.
Particularly the Muppet models, Bert and Ernie.
The Muppet models, or Megatron, I guess is the newer ones now. These gigantic language models that are able to learn off of patterns from huge corpuses of data. I think kind of unleashing those in different law firms to read all their documents and kind of see what you can do with models trained like that. I think that's an exciting growth area.
Stephanie, where do you see exciting growth?
Well, I would be remiss not to mention the area of research and the company that I co-founded 3.5 years ago in search, but specifically applicable is just what Jason mentioned. When we started the company 3.5 years ago, some of the technologies that we used to build the initial version of our product are pretty outdated now, and that was not long ago. So the rapid pace of change in the space and the advancements that we've seen are just absolutely incredible. And taking a task that was traditionally quite a tedious task and being able to accomplish that task with such great accuracy has been something that I've seen improve over time and improve quite significantly. So I'm really excited to continue to see where it goes.
Roland, what are you most excited about?
I think, the BERT and GPT NLP models, those are exciting. We saw our fellow and one of the, it's the VP of research at CaseText, present some of the use of it at our Future Law conference this past year. That was exciting how you could see how the machine can actually start to understand the concepts, right? Not just the keywords, but it appears to have an understanding of a concept, and that was, I think, quite interesting. And it'll be exciting to see where this goes in transactional practice. But for me, we've sort of doubled down on a research effort on computable contracts, contracts that are, automatable and operationalizable. Specifically, we're focusing on the insurance industry. We feel, there's lots of areas where, there's sort of, there's different bargaining power, information asymmetries. We feel like that technology can really empower consumers, to better understand their rights in contracts. And I think it's that's an area that I'm excited about, but it's we're sort of early days in that space, and it's not sort of like quite available just yet.
Yes, that is exciting, computable contrast, and I will be working with you shortly.
Yes, you started the whole field, Harry, with your seminal paper 10 years ago. So,
Oh, well, thank you. Let me turn to a student question. Nick Matera. Hello, Nick. Thanks for joining us.
Hi, Professor. Thank you, everyone, for such an interesting panel so far. I just wanted to revisit something you said, Jason. You discussed the challenges of hand-entered data tagging, something I've done before, and it seems like AI presents an opportunity to streamline this task and a lot of these menial tasks like that. That doesn't seem obvious to a lot of average law firms. And do you have any idea what the current or future landscape to increase technological literacy or familiarity with these AI tools for the average lawyer would be?
Yeah, that's a great question. And obviously it depends a lot on kind of the culture in different organizations. One thing that I've kind of found effective, because I work very closely, not just with the attorney practitioners, but entire client teams. Often, especially for some of the kind of administrative tasks, the best place to start to get kind of technology adoption is more on the administrative, the paralegals, the people who are having to do those menial tasks. I've found, ironically, people sometimes think, if you go to somebody who's working as a support staff for attorney and say, look, we've got an AI that can do portions of of the work that you're doing right now, that there would be pushback. I found the exact opposite true. Most of these people are overwhelmed with a huge amount of work and are happy to get any kind of assistance. So, I mean, I think the trajectory that seems most likely to me for a law firm environment is, tools that kind of help the administrative staff work more effectively. That is a great entry point to sort of to grow to other tasks as well. And there's a lot of great technology in that space that's kind of coming online now to do exactly these things.
Any other reactions to the Nick's question? Okay, we've got another question from Krister Kroll.
Hi. Yeah, I'd like to direct the question around, most of these are repeatable workflows that we're talking about today, things like paralegal work. Where are the places where AI actually outperforms human performance? Where does this actually augment practice in ways that we can't perform as humans?
I would say, the first thing that comes to mind for me is just this whole area of prediction, right? Like, this area of like predicting how a judge will decide or how a patent examiner will decide. You need to just process a lot of data points that humans can not process normally to see patterns and make a prediction. And so I think that's what I would say sort of spontaneously.
I'll add a point with search. We find often when I speak to clients that they use our tool for 5 minutes and they uncover some incredibly relevant piece of the document that could potentially invalidate whatever invention that they're seeking to invalidate that they would never have found on their own. And that's because of the technology that we're employing doesn't rely on traditional techniques. So it's approaching the problem in a completely different way. So it's able to surpass what would be normally capable of a human being. So absolutely, we're seeing that in the search space.
Jason?
Yeah, I just add, it's an interesting question because I think there's at least two dimensions to this, right? One, I think you're kind of asking a little bit about quality, right? What can a computer do in terms of making a decision that outperforms what a human can do? There's also a dimension here in time, right? Which is in some sense maybe part of what goes into Stephanie's example. So, if you ask the question, give a human infinite amount of time to review a set of contracts, they probably can go farther in terms of quality than AI systems right now. But if you time constrain it, I think there's probably a lot of tasks. There's probably a huge number of tasks where computers outperform people just because they can read a lot faster and look across a lot set of data. So That's a real discussion, I think, that people are having inside of practices is where is the trade-off, right? Not just, are we going to maximize quality to a gazillion degrees? Most clients don't necessarily want that, right? They've got, even if they want humans doing it, they've got a budget. So I'd say the more time constrained, probably the better machines are doing right now.
Yeah, those are all great points. And I'll add on that. I think a principle is where there's large amounts of data that would be too time-consuming or cumbersome for humans to look through, computers can outperform it. And a really good analog outside of law is credit card fraud detection. No human could possibly look through millions of credit card transactions and spot fraud, whereas it's trivial for a computer to spot fraud in this way. And there are analogs in law when it comes to things like document review and things of that nature, which we'll actually touch on in the next panel. So great question, Krister. Thanks so much. We've got, go ahead.
Oh, I was just saying thank you.
Oh, thank you. We've got another question. Where and how do we see AI education being introduced into law school education?
I think that's a question for you, Harry.
Yeah, so I mean, I actually do teach a course on AI and law, but it's definitely not common because it's more incipient. I think where I would like to see a little bit of education, is to Stephanie's point, is to attorneys who are going to be using these systems to become more educated consumers of these systems in ways that they can properly interpret and contextualize the results and also its limitations, and also understand things like the distortions that have gone into the data or the model that might be kind of skewing them outside. But Roland, you also teach a class on AI and law, so I'd love to hear your thoughts.
So I think many law schools around the world are asking themselves that question. How do you prepare sort of the next generation of lawyers for this kind of changing marketplace? And there are different models out there. So one is we need to integrate the tech into all the core subjects, so that in your contracts class you will also learn about computable contracts, and in your patent class you will learn about patent analytics, or you have a core course on AI and law. And many times it's easier for law school faculties to think about the law of AI questions. What are all the interesting legal and ethical issues raised by AI, rather than building tech to do legal things and legal tasks. And so anyways, I think we see quite a bit of experimentation at law schools, and I think some of it is like the course I'm teaching with Mike Geneseret is for folks who are builders. They want to build stuff. It brings in computer scientists and law students, and it's project driven. And then there's some experimentation on sort of breaking out, and that's usually as small as maybe 20% of the student population. But how you need to reach, the remaining 80%. And I think, for them, I think it's kind of to Harry's point, it's really make them good users of the technologies that are out there, make them understand, work with data better and becoming better consumers. I think that's a good way to put it.
So we're just about out of time. Jason or Stephanie, want to have some final words?
At least for the training, I think that's a tough problem. The technology is moving pretty quickly, so I think some understanding of first principles probably helps kind of keep up with the times as the implementations change.
Stephanie?
Yeah, I'll just add that I think that it'll be driven by the next generation of lawyers. A lot of the change will be driven by the next generation of lawyers. I was recently speaking on a panel that perhaps some of you were also speaking on. And we heard from one of the private practice attorneys that students come up through the law school and enter into private practice expecting a certain level of automation, especially if they had some sort of career in engineering or some other field before starting their legal career, and they're just gravely disappointed by how manual a lot of the tasks are in the legal profession, and shocked, frankly. So, you know, it's sort of up to you, students, to change a lot of these, drive a lot of the change, and not to put any pressure on you as you enter into your final exam shortly. But that's all I'll add.
Well, we are out of time, but I want to thank Jason, Stephanie, and Roland for a terrific discussion about AI and legal practice grounded in reality, which is what we were looking for. So thank you so much for joining us. We now have a 15-minute break. We'll be returning at 15 after the hour for our next panel. But thank you for his panelists. You guys did an excellent job.
Thank you. Thank you,
Hey,
Harry.
Thanks very
Thanks so
much.
much, Harry. Thanks, everybody.
See you all. Bye-bye.